Welcome to the Christian Media Marketing Show. I'm glad you're here with me today. My name is John. Thanks for listening if you're on the podcast or watching if you're watching us and joining us here on YouTube. I say us because, yes, it is me here on the camera and in your ears, but at Kavanaugh Media, it's a team. And as a team, our desire is to serve the King and serve the kingdom, which means potentially serving you in the best ways that we possibly can. And we do this through a marketing newsletter that we send out each week, where we're looking through tons of articles and trying to figure out what's the most important stuff that can help you in your digital engagement efforts. We do that through coaching teams. We do that through being the ad agency who is setting up accounts, doing everything from running the ads, all of that. In fact, we're running a major campaign right now as I record this for the Olympics, and we're learning a lot. I'll probably share some of that here in the near future. We're also moving forward to move from being a business as mission to being a nonprofit, because we believe that that will even open up even more opportunities to serve more and more teams and individuals around the field. I have been doing social media marketing and digital engagement. And we use that term digital engagement because what we want to be a part is not just the evangelism and discipleship, that part of social media and digital technologies, but the full missionary task from pre-field to really leaving a field and leaving the leadership and the church development and the groups, all of that there and strong. And so in digital engagement efforts and in the work that we're doing, now, after almost 8 years of doing it, there are certain things that you just get used to doing. And there are certain ways that you get used to doing stuff, and yet it continues to change. And so, as a team, we meet every morning. We're talking through work, we're talking through issues, we're talking through things we're seeing or challenges. And we're constantly trying to lean into what's next. We don't want to fall victim to shiny object syndrome. Lots of people will see stuff and go, oh, well, this is the new thing or whatever. We want to use what's working, and we really want to lean into that. Yes, we're doing research and development. In fact, we're planning to do a webinar here soon where I'm going to be sharing just a lot of the technology that I don't share here on the show that we think could be a benefit to you, and some security practices. But there's also just, when it comes to platforms, we are using lots of different ones, even though there are some major ones that we tend to lean into a lot because it works and because that's where people are. But if you just keep doing the same thing, well, as the saying goes, you'll keep getting the same results. And so as a team, we are leaning into new things, but we're also just trying to figure out, well, what's changed and what's not true anymore. It's possible for you to go online and maybe even go through some of our old training materials or take a course that's talking about social media marketing, and it be wrong. Like, things have just changed. That practice, those things aren't true anymore. And so this week and next week, I'm going to be talking a little bit just about confirmation bias, some atonement theories, really spiritual stuff, because it impacts how we do digital engagement. And so the way we do stuff, we find after a while that we just keep doing things and we don't question as to why. In fact, with what I'm going to be sharing today, there's several different ways that people look at the idea of being made right with God. And I think it impacts our ads, and I think it impacts how we just communicate what is good news to the person that's seeing the ad, watching the video, reading the text, following the Bible reading plan, or whatever it is, whatever strategies that you are using. How do they see that information? And then when they begin to engage with the people responding to them, to your online responders, how are the responders speaking back into these people's lives? And the area of culture plays a huge part of that. That will be the second part of this. That will be next week's podcast and show here, is we're going to dive into just this idea of confirmation bias and how culture impacts that. But this week, I want to begin by maybe bringing to mind some different types of ways of people look at, well, what's good news? Because depending upon where you are from, what culture you are from, the way you look at the message of Jesus, the message of the good news itself can be really varies a lot. And if you're from the Western world, you probably look at it from a guilt and forgiveness type of way of looking at it. But there's others. So let's dive into this week's training, looking at different atonement theories and how that can impact your digital engagement ads. All right. So there's lots of different ways that people read the Bible and how they view what is good news. And the theological term for this is atonement theories, or how are we atoned? How is our sin atoned for? And that's a really interesting thing. The whole idea of sin, and I'll share a little bit more about this, is just sin itself is things that we do, things that are done to us, things that are being done around us. And that comes from John Mark Comer, great book that I'll share more about next week, where he talks about this. But when we are looking at the world around us, we realize this just isn't right. When children are exploited and hurt, when there's war and violence and selfishness, all of these things make up a picture of a world that's broken, a world that's in need of a savior, a world in need of being made right. And so we see it in our own lives, even if we don't understand the word, and we see it in the lives of others as well. Just as a side note, as I get started, for me, working in Asia and working in the Chinese language among Chinese people and in Taiwan, it is interesting, even the word itself for sin, 罪, they would think of that only from a criminal kind of way of looking at it. But the idea of the world's not right, well, they might use something different. And so when we're looking at these atonement theories and how it impacts your ads, I'm hoping that you're really diving into your cultural landscape. And what I would submit is that there are multiple different types of theories here, and they actually are played out in different ways. So it's not just one, there's multiple pieces. And in a global world with digital types of communication, we're seeing this becoming more and more mixed together. So let me go through these with you. The first one is just guilt and innocence. And in guilt and innocence itself, Christianity emphasizes this idea of forgiveness, that you're guilty, that you need to be made innocent and reconciled through Christ. And so this is, if you're in the Western world, probably the way that you read scripture. This is the way you look at all things of Christ's death, his burial, his resurrection. All of these things are from that mindset of guilt and innocence. And if that's your predominant way of looking at it, but it's not the way of the culture you're working in, well, then your ads and your responding may be from a really different, it's going to be viewed differently by those who are receiving the ads and receiving that response back from your responders or from your plans. And so guilt and innocence is very much a Western Protestant way of looking at it. But there are other ways as well, such as just honor and shame. Now, this is one much more in Asian context where people are part of collectivistic culture, where you have the nation and the state and then the city and then your family name and then your name, which is how we would address our mail even in Taiwan. But when you do something that brings shame to the group, well, that's this idea that's being brought about. Or you can bring honor to your family or to your group or to your nation or whatever. And so there's honor and shame. And the gospel itself offers restoration of honor. That's done through Jesus still. So this counters the shame and it brings dignity and acceptance. And here's the key thing, into God's family. So what parts of your digital engagement ads and material are referring to honor and shame potentially in your audience? It is something, depending upon your culture, that could be a big thing. Another one is power and fear. And you'll see this in, not to say only in these locations, but this is a predominant one in many of the African countries around the world, and that there are powers. And this is very biblical. All of these are very biblical worldviews and cultural views, and they're all talked about in the Bible. Christianity presents God's ultimate power and protection. He is the ultimate person who has the power to protect you from spiritual warfare, from all sorts of things. And he provides this refuge from fear then. So we know that the one that we are aligning with, the one that we are following, is the one that has power, who can overcome fear and the fear that we see. So does that play into the ads and the things that you're sharing? Does that play into your responses from your responders? Or are they going back to maybe a different cultural view when they're sharing? One side note before we look at the next one here is that if you are using local people as your responders, well, it's very possible that if they spend a ton of time around you, they will begin to defer to your cultural views of things, and they'll actually just begin to view things from your outsider and expat view. So be very careful that they are bringing their cultural perspective and the local cultural perspective to the creation of ads, to the follow up, all of those things. Let's keep going. Another one is just the idea of being clean or defiled. And through Christ's sacrifice, believers are cleansed. We are washed. We are made new and pure. And this overcomes defilement. Maybe that's one you haven't thought of before, but it is a cultural view that's out there, and it impacts how people view what is good news. Another one would be this idea of being lost or being found, belonging. And there's parables and teaching of Jesus. In fact, many of these can be found just in the book of Ephesians itself. You're going to see it laid out over and over there. But here in this idea is that the Christian message offers the chance to belong and be a part of and have the identity of being in God's family instead of being alone and separate. And this is a very powerful one, especially in cultures that are individualistic. In fact, what you'll see is that many times people want to belong to something. They want to come to your simple churches or your groups or wherever you're gathering, maybe even before they believe the message itself. And that belonging precedes believing here, depending upon where you are. And so they become a part of it. They see these things and they begin to then understand of what it means to be in God's family. Another one is just peace and chaos. And in a world where there's violence, in a world of war and so much more, this is a cultural view that people may look at it and go, this world is just pure chaos. And they're longing for something. And what I think they're longing for is peace. And Jesus offers peace. And that transcends all understanding, Scripture says. And it brings order to our lives. Even in the midst of chaos, Christ's peace should bring us a sense of order and structure. It should give us a sense of calm, even when everything else is chaotic out there. And so, is that the gospel to you? Is that the good news to you? Do you see that from Jesus? And do you reflect that in your digital engagement efforts? If, just on a personal note, if your personal feed is filled with all sorts of scary stuff, oh, the world's bad and this is happening and whatever else, I know that's a lot of the marketing. I know that's a lot of the messaging around the world because it sells. That's what fear does. That's what chaos does. But when we just continue to share that ourselves personally, we are running against the message of the gospel and the good news. People need to see peace in our lives, even in the midst of chaos. So this is a cultural view of how people would look at what is good news. One final one, and that is just this idea of hope versus despair. And it is the resurrection of Jesus. It is the empty tomb that gives us that living hope in Jesus. It's a transforming type of hope that takes the despair in our lives and it turns it into something of hope and of purpose. We have been created, once again in Ephesians it says this, for good works, which God has prepared beforehand. Before you and I ever took our first breath, God had a plan and a purpose for our lives. And people need to hear that all around the world. The message that they hear so much is your life is of no value. Maybe it's a caste system. Maybe it's in a country that is feeling despair and the chaos. Maybe it's people who have been told, well, you're just not smart or you're not beautiful or you're not whatever. And the gospel message, the good news, can bring hope where many people have just felt despair. And so, of these 7 different cultural worldviews, are you using different bits of these? Are you trying different ads with different messaging? Are you portraying in the videos and the photography and your creatives these different types of cultural elements? What are the main ones in your place of where you serve? What's the biggest one? But what are the other ones that are making their way in a global world filled with social media ads and social media and digital and TV and all of that, all of these are being shared and people are seeing them in different levels. And so I hope that that is being played out in your digital engagement efforts as well. In next week's podcast, we're going to look at the idea of how culture does play into then the way we look at stuff and how we do this. So it's going to take these and go even deeper into it of where they're formed and how they change and all of that. But these are some of the bedrock cultural views of how people view just the good news itself, right? So hopefully that gives you some things to think about. If you are a person who likes to read, well, this book, Practicing the Way, Be with Jesus, Become Like Him, Do as He Did by John Mark Comer. Well, that book has been really powerful to me. It's been a book that it's just challenging me. I really appreciate it. And that's what is driving this week and next week's episodes, because I think it plays out in our discipleship, in our digital engagement, and all of these things. So be thinking about not just your ads, but you're responding. Be asking hard questions. What's changing? And then we're going to look more in detail about that in next week's podcast, Lord willing, as we look into this idea of confirmation bias and all of these things and how culture plays a part in that. As always, if you have questions, if you have ideas of trainings or things you'd like for us to be addressing, please reach out, let us know. And until next time, keep pressing forward and making Jesus famous. We appreciate you and all you do for the gospel, for the King, and for the kingdom. Until next time, take care and God bless.